Former Johannesburg Mayor Herman Mashaba launched his new party called Action SA. The seed money for the launch is said to have come from his own pocket. He called for hard diplomacy against the Zimbabwean government and for private prosecution to be pursued in the fight against gender-based violence. Action SA is determined to uproot what they call a broken political system and to build a prosperous, non-racial and secure future for all its people. But is Action SA an attractive option of the residents in Gauteng? To have this discussion, we are joined by political analyst Khanya Bonani. A very good morning to you, Khanya. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you for joining us on Weekend Dawn. Now, what did you think of the party launch yesterday?
Good morning to the viewers at home. I believe that it was a decent launch. I think it was a good mix of obviously, you want to ensure that people see that you have engaged with the public, but also you want to have representatives from different walks of life politically, not just encouraging this party's introduction or debut into the political circuit, but also hear the values of the party and what it stands for and what it looks to do moving forward, which I think they managed to sell, I think, well on all accounts. A few, policy or position plays that I think will be interesting to watch moving forward, but I think that they did a good job overall.
So in terms of what he said when it comes to things like illegal immigrants as well as dealing with the corruption within the ANC, don't you think that his timing was just perfect, considering that there's so much infighting within the ANC and there's so much issues with our neighboring countries like Zimbabwe? So he just used those issues to talk about how he can do better.
I think it was a good, I'm not going to lie to you, from a timing point of view, any day is a good day from a corruption point of view within the ANC. It was a good time for him to not just set himself apart or set his party apart, but, to also, affirm what a lot of people on the ground and ordinary South Africans have been wanting to happen in terms of just thinking about the return of the Scorpions and how that would work, thinking about the NPA and how to strengthen the NPA, not just in terms of regional heads in the different provinces, but obviously making the capacity for the NPA to come after, known, associates and corrupt institutions. I'm glad that he didn't mention individuals, but he spoke to, how do we deal with this issue regardless of who the person is, who the company is, etc. I think that, he is thinking about these things and he is taking on a lot of the outcomes that came from the sort of research capacity that they've built in the past year, which I think is useful, obviously, but again, the action is in the pudding.
Yeah. We're looking at Mashaba's political journey, you could say. Him coming up as Joburg Mayor and then, of course, leaving towards the end of last year and now setting up a new party. Do you think he's won the hearts of Gautengers specifically because of the work that he put in as Joburg Mayor when he was still with the DA?
I mean, I think he's put in a lot of good. He's got a lot of good institutional memory. Great, that's out of the window. So I think that in itself is proving to be useful. I mean, the fact that he has garnered, quite an extensive number of volunteers, the various sort of voices that you've heard within the launch video itself are mostly Gauteng-based politicians, career politicians at that, and even some of the people he's recruited are Gauteng-based politicians, MPLs, former leaders, going extensively as to go into MPs. So I think at this point in time, he understands the heart of Johannesburg because he's led Johannesburg. Whether that's going to translate into Ekurhuleni and Tshwane is going to be interesting. Ekurhuleni will be a tougher prospect because Vasina has got clean audits. He's brought foreign direct investment into the city, etc. He's sitting pretty, so to speak. Tshwane is a easier gamble because they have gone into by-elections knowing that they've dissolved the coalition. So the only thing I would actually say to Action SA is that they have to consider who are the right partners to have should Botswana go into coalition again. And if they don't want coalition, they want to lead for themselves. What is the best approach, considering he is a hometown favorite. He is I think maybe 30 km away from Pretoria where he was born. So I think the party needs to establish quickly in their election campaign where are the hotspot areas, where are the targets, how do they work with the issues that are within those sort of targeted areas, and how do they establish, their own sort of platform to speak from that will be engaging to the people, one, and two, will actually be solution-orientated rather than passive.
Khanya, do you think you as a young person have been intrigued by what Herman Mashaba had to say about his manifesto? Do you think it's appealed to the youth, this new political party?
I mean, to be fair, there are segments of their sort of policy positions that I think has made it interesting for young people, in that obviously jobs is a big part of the conversation right now. Jobs, trying to find access to entrepreneurship is another. Looking at things like electoral reform, I think one of the things that Action SA got right was the focus on electoral reform, on quality education. I don't think that young people will necessarily warm up to this initially, but based on the work that they're doing on the ground in terms of the volunteers that they've gotten together and the focus on sort of what does this party look like in its smallest unit, in its simplest form, I think that that'll have to play a very big role in bringing young people in. I think that the electoral reform helps in that it changes the way in which we elect leaders, and I think young people would be attracted to that, considering that young people didn't vote in this past election. But whether it will go as far as bringing them in, outside of the quality education points that they had, outside of economic prosperity, they'd have to do a lot more work, especially with economic prosperity and, the very strong views that they have around BEE. What is the alternative? I asked the same question of the DA maybe, I think, about a month before the 2019 elections, and still till today, we don't have a clear understanding of what is this alternative of economic transformation outside of BEE, and how would that work? Which also sort of places the question, is, as much as Herman Mashaba is a businessman, who is he pandering to? Is he just going, because he has contacts in the private sector, is he pandering just for the private sector? How does this economic prosperity, translate itself on the ground for ordinary South Africans who don't even have access to economic participation?
That's a great question you asked there. I'd like to leave you with my final question. Do you think this party has staying power? I mean, we've seen the likes of COPE come up the ranks. We've seen Khanya SA come up the ranks, and they didn't do pretty well. And then you're up against the likes of the DA, the EFF, and, of course, the ANC. Do you think it has any staying power? Is it going to be Herman does a big shake-up from the beginning, or is it going to take time for a party like this to actually be credible and win voters' hearts?
I think it will depend mostly on how well they can use their political pedigree and their backgrounds in terms of the different parties they've associated with. So they have an extensive black book in terms of the people they've managed to pull together in this leadership team that Herman Mashaba outlined, right? So I think one of the things they need to take care of, and pretty quickly, is it's not just the recruitment of new members or high-profile members. It's also how do we now use this sort of network to now further our agenda. As much as they're not necessarily sitting in Parliament, one of the big talking points that they have is around electoral reform, which is something that has to change within the next 24 months. I would suggest that they go to the guys that took the electoral reform to the Constitutional Court in the first place. Talk to those guys, see how far they're getting in terms of bringing this onto the table and speaking to which political parties they have approached since that ruling to get it tabled in Parliament. Also, you'd have to now start thinking about how do they use this the sort of pedigree to garner influence from a policy point of view, from a literacy point of view. But I think most importantly, one of the things they have to work on is the fact that the South African voter is a conservative voter in that their sort of electoral voting behavior hasn't really changed in a long time until the EFF came along, who have now shown us that there is a different way of garnering popularity, right? But the fundamental question here is how do you gain the language to speak past those conservative ideals, those conservative values? Because it's all good and well to say we're a new party, but if you don't have the language and if you don't understand what people are really looking for, you're not going to make it far. It'll be a slow burn, but at the same time it won't garner the same growth as an EFF, which is what I think everybody is going to start comparing to every time a new party comes in. I think it's very surprising that Mandisa Mashaba came in with a message, especially after she stepped down from her leadership position in the Gauteng legislature. It'll be interesting to see if they turn to her in terms of how to manage influence and how to, be able to build on that, because I mean people like Mandisa are important because they understand how to build a new party from the ground up, particularly in the province that they want to make the biggest impact and the biggest impression on. So it'll be interesting to see if they take the lessons that they have learned from their previous political homes and be able to use the networks that they have as a way in which to not just start conversations that are favorable for them, but also start leading not just discussions, in the public discourse, but also managing to find ways in which to break through the electoral voting barriers that they're up against.
Khanya Bonani, we'll leave it right there. Thank you so much for your time. Khanya Bonani was speaking to us about the launch of Action SA and whether the party is an attractive alternative for South Africans. Remember, it was launched yesterday.